He said, if you put financial at the head of the line and make it the highest priority, the rest of it falls apart because money is a tool. It's not the purpose of a thriving family.
Welcome to the Tracking Connections podcast, and thanks for listening.
We feature voices from around the world, sharing stories of working intentionally with deep nature connection in ways that transform lives, families, projects, and communities. I'm Sarah.
I'm Aiden.
And I'm John.
And we are your hosts from Living Connection First.
Hi everyone, this is Sarah.
Hey everybody, it's Aiden, and we're excited today to be joined by Peter Johnson, a longtime financial planner, co-founder of Family Nature Retreats, and author of the Little Book of Family Treasure.
Yep, really nice to be in conversation with you today, Peter. This is John Young, and Peter and I are both co-founders, along with Lana Holden, of the Family Nature Retreats project, and I've gotten to know Peter very well over the last few years, and it's going to be an interesting conversation. As we lift up voices from around the world, it's not often that you think about, the connection worldview, whatever you want to call that, the connection tools as something that pertains to the kind of work that Peter does. But this is going to be a fascinating conversation. I think it will be perking up everyone's ear. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you, John. I am really excited to be here and to share the message. Each of us have our gifts that we usually earn when we undergo some kind of trauma in our lives, or we see something that other people don't see. And the thing that I learned, I have been burning to get out to people for almost 20 years now, and refining it, developing it. It led me to you and really to a lot of good things for people. So nature is seemingly distant, but it's actually part of this.
Yeah, because people can draw conclusions. Oh, he's a financial planner, wealth and legacy. What does that have to do with nature connection? But it is really fascinating to me. I first met Peter, I believe, at a retreat that we offered in Felton, California, in the mountains, called Music, Nature, and Storytelling. Is that where we met, Peter?
That's where we actually had time to talk a little bit. But originally we met at the Pilgrim's Way bookstore. And you were a speaker. You had to be across the street because you drew so many people. And I got to hear your story about staying quiet as you walk into the forest so you didn't scare the birds off. So, but when you did the week-long or several-day retreat on music, nature, and storytelling, I thought, I like all three of those things. I must go. Little did I know that you had something in common with my work.
Yeah, that was quite a surprise. And what drew me to Peter was a story that he shared. I would call it a frightening statistic, actually, that is so ubiquitous in modern times. I know in the U.S., I don't know if this is true all over the world in modern society, but many of us think that when we write a will, and then when we pass away, that everything is going to go smooth for the people we leave behind. And that is not the case. And when Peter told me a little bit about his personal story around this, but also the statistics around this, it made me think, wow, this is so common. I wonder if the people connection tools and the nature connection tools that I've been using to help support, building community around doing nature connection with children and families and adults could be useful to help with legacy work, in families, trying to make sure that things get passed down.
When I went to that workshop with John and several other people, the music, nature, and storytelling, John kept talking about connection. And I'd gotten to the point in my work, starting as a financial planner, big on education for people. And I had realized that the way my own personal family story went, which was a disaster in many ways, the way that went really required certain kinds of prevention modalities, if you will, or practices. And I saw that John had already prepared the way and done a lot of work around connection. So that was the next piece I was looking for. I had the piece of conflict resolution and keeping families out of court. And that's all well and good. But really, if you don't have trust and communication and helpfulness and the attributes, you don't have a lot yet. So John's work I saw is just completely a great fit, great compliment, and that he had a system and a structure down to help people achieve those attributes. So shall I go into my dreadful story?
Yeah, let's start with a dreadful story. It'll get bright afterwards.
So picture this. It was the week of my college graduation. I was a little bit of a late bloomer. It was the eve of my 30th birthday. And I was up here in the Bay Area, and my mother was down in the LA area. And she had been battling brain cancer for about a year. And I got a call that she was probably not going to survive the night. So here I am in my little studio apartment all by myself, very, very close to my mother. She was like my biggest cheerleader, and I was getting straight A's in college. And, we had a lot of fun celebrating that on the phone regularly. And so about 2 a.m, I woke up and my heart was pounding, and I had a great deal of anxiety. And I tried to relax, and I got my heart rate back down a bit. But then I started getting anxious again, and it went back up again. And God knows what it was, but it was maybe 180 beats a minute. It was really high. Scared me to death. And so I was wrestling with my own anxiety for the rest of the night, with the background of my birthday being the next day and my mother probably dying. So I checked myself into the hospital, Stanford Hospital, about 5 a.m, thinking if something's going to happen, it should happen here. And the doctors didn't even give me Valium or anything. They just said the way they were taught was that when people had a crisis, they just needed somebody to talk to. So I dragged my worn out body home and started reaching out to people. Had a couple of good friends who were not available because they were on vacation or something. And so I started reaching out to people I didn't know all that well. And it started this search that goes on to develop and maintain quality relationships and connection, because it's absolutely essential for survival and well-being. And luckily, I went that way instead of isolating. Then we had some financial issues come up with the estate later, and some problems with my brother, and wound up in court. So first was connection, and then was the money stuff. And my mother had a great estate plan put together, a traditional one, and with brothers, a way to divide things up that seemed orderly. But with one brother being out of control, to say the least, I wound up in court with him, and it's been over 40 years now. I have not seen him. And then later, when our grandmother died, she left about $60 million to charity, because the family didn't have a common vision of what wealth was for, and she didn't like the way that people were handling their lives, but didn't let anybody know. So we lost a lot of money, we lost relationships, and years later, it just dawned on me, I was reading a book called Preparing Heirs, that if you prepare heirs, they're going to do better than if they're unprepared. Kind of like giving a kid a Ferrari without a driver's training, that's kind of a disaster. And money tends to make us more of what we already are. So I was already into investments, financial planning, and then I said, wow, here's something that can affect people for generations, cause trauma, loss of relationships, loss of wealth. And personally, it was a big deal. So it became my mission, my life purpose to bring this out to people.
So many people take for granted that all that kind of stuff just happens in the background and it all works. But the statistics of how often these transfers between generations end up in court, what is that number, Peter? I think it shocked me into being like, I wonder if I can help you with some of the connection tools.
Well, I don't know how often families wind up in court, but I have discovered that when I bring this subject up, virtually everybody, maybe everybody I've ever mentioned it to, says at least they know some family that has had a lot of conflict and people not talking to each other. But the failure rate, according to one of the seminal studies, of estate transfer success, the failure rate is 70% for each generation. So by the time you get to 3 generations down, you have maybe a 10% chance of things going well. So that means there's either lost relationships, or there's some kind of conflict, or there's estrangement for some time, or the family fritters away the money on lawyers, or maybe family members who have addictions and things like that. There's a failure to convey the wealth to the next generation frequently, whether they go to court or not.
Yeah, and legacy can be a lot more than just the finances and property. I want to remind everybody who has been mentored in nature connection or influenced by the likes of the recently deceased Tom Brown Jr. or Ingwe, who was a mentor to me when I was in my 20s and 30s. All of these traditional ways of connecting to the earth that are very universal, that are very helpful to our nervous system, are all legacies. And when I think about, what I know, how I can help people now, how many I've helped who are now helping others, that is because of Tom Brown Jr., that's because of Ingwe, that's because of Jake and Judy Swamp, all of whom invested a legacy of wisdom and practices into our teamwork that we were all trying to look at from a universal point of view, that when Ingwe was near death, he reminded us, and I know Aiden remembers this because Aiden was growing up with Ingwe as his grandfather, you must promise Ingwe that you'll make sure these things reach the future generations beyond my lifetime. And there was one particular naturalist training program that he and I designed together, and he named it the Kamana Naturalist Training Program. And he said, whatever you do, John, you make sure that this continues for the children of the future. Otherwise, Ingwe will haunt you, he would say, So, it's not a will in that sense, but it was his mandate to me. And I felt the responsibility for that. So in 2022, when that program was threatened with being sunsetted because of the editing that it needed, I had to think about my commitment to Ingwe to pass this legacy forward. And as I sit and think about, how many days left I have on the earth, I just watched so many of my elders pass away, including Tom Brown last year. My day is coming. And what am I doing to make sure that this goes forward? We often talk about in the Art of Mentoring Network around the world what we call regenerative design. Regenerative literally means making sure that beyond us, it continues to grow and spread, right? And we all have to be thinking that way. And we don't want to think about our death. We don't want to think about the death of our loved ones or our parents. Yet all of us will have to face that. And to be awake and proactive around it, I think is really important. I started to think about, how could the connection modeling, for instance, working with families, because I had told Peter, I've worked with families who were in crisis and that had, rough dynamics. And I worked with them with these connection modeling tools, and the family came together stronger. The kids did better. Maybe there's a place for this in this work, but, perhaps, trust attorneys and various people who are handling family legacy transfer in whatever form it takes aren't thinking about influencing positive connective family culture. And I wondered, could we do this with families? Could we help them? And I think I really wanted to learn from Peter because he had been doing a lot of work with families with trusts and estates. And, I was really thinking about, okay, what's the best way for what we're doing to move beyond our lifetime to continue to reach the future generations in an ever-expanding regenerative way? And that was the sweet spot that brought us together. And so we set about to work on this idea of family nature retreats and to work with service professionals, people who are in the service industry of helping families with legacy, help them, with these connection tools. So we'll occasionally run retreats for professionals as well that are just lovely, because a lot of the people that we work with are also really concerned about, helping family dynamics to heal, because if the family is truly bonded, truly connected, then it's more likely that the transfer between generations will occur in the way that it was promised. And I'll just end, my mother's birthday just recently passed. She would have been 95. She started working on her legacy, called me in 2015 to tell me that she was death ready. And I thought that was so morbid. But she assured me it wasn't. And what it had done was free her to live the rest of her days with all of her vitality, because she had handled every single detail, and she made it really clear to my sister and I. And when she passed away, it was so, sad, of course, but it was also beautiful just how her proactive forethought and communication with Kim and I get along really well. We were able to, experience that. And I was marveling, just thinking about the statistics. Just thank you, Mom, for really thinking about us, But yeah, it's not something we always want to talk about, but it's definitely something worth talking about. I wonder, Peter, if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, you came really close to, I think, the central point of what we're talking about today. The way that estate planning is done in our culture, it largely ignores the human side of the equation. The lawyers look at how can we save taxes? How can we avoid probate? Do we have somebody in line to make health decisions? Maybe something about how old the kids should be when they get their inheritance. These are all letting money take the driver's seat. And things don't turn out well if you do that. One of our colleagues mentions the 5 human capitals, being our abilities as human beings, our intellectual capital, our social capital, our spiritual capital, and our financial capital. He said if you put financial at the head of the line and make it the highest priority, the rest of it falls apart, because money is a tool. It's not the purpose of a thriving family. And I think our current political climate really demonstrates this so loud and clear. The decisions being made right now are all about money and not about relationships and people. And it's a freaking disaster, because money works in the context of people and relationships. But it is a tool, and it helps achieve other things. But if you don't know what you're living for or know each other's values in a family dynamic, we're sort of missing the boat on who we're dealing with and whether we can have successful relationships. So the financial can support those other aspects, but it's the one thing, too, that really can be replaced, whereas our well-being and our intellectual capacity and social connections and so on are very hard to replace. So that's the main thing, is we're here to talk about the human side of estates and legacy. But legacy is a whole lot more than just somebody dying. Legacy is our culture. It's the wake that we leave behind our boat, if you will. And it has to do with regenerative design, as John mentioned. It isn't just about preserving the family wealth. It's about how do you cope in a changing world? What other tools do you need to succeed in life besides money? As I said, money comes and goes, but the relationships and the skills and the knowledge and the wisdom and the desire to be of service to others, these are the things that really drive human behavior and determine outcomes. One of my colleagues said, we're all ancestors in training, meaning we're either leaving a conscious legacy or we're leaving a shadow legacy. If we're not conscious of it, it's a shadow legacy. It might be good, might not be, but there's so much impact that we have that it really behooves us to look at what kind of legacy we're leaving behind and what kind of legacy we're creating in the lives around us right now and in our own life. I think when some of these questions about family values and purpose and well-being are addressed, then the lives of the living become so much better. It really becomes an environment where individuals can flourish and be successful at life, because it's complex, requires a lot of skills, requires self-confidence. And I'll just make another point here because it's important. We don't learn about money through just knowledge. It's learned through practice, through skill building. And so we need to practice with the actual thing. We need mentoring, which John is a master at. And we don't just need somebody telling us we should be doing this or that, because that doesn't engender a lot of excitement. So I think you can begin to see how my work and John's overlap, because we're looking at the well-being of the culture being so influential on the well-being of the individuals that really it's indistinguishable.
Specifically, not just the culture of society at large, but the culture of the family and then the relationship circles, right? Because that's where we can have influence.
And that's where we learn how to have relationships, including boundaries and speaking up in our businesses and our lives when we grow up and, become functioning members of society. That's the training ground. And it can be a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be intimidating.
So, Peter, I'm fascinated about sort of two elements of this, which is one, what were the pieces of this connection work that you saw, right? That kind of had the light bulb go on. You could see it apply in your work. And then how did that lead to sort of the designing of Family Nature Retreat?
That's really a great question. And it leads right to the heart of how this all came about and the insights. And, well, I'll try to be clear and elucidate this as well as I can. But a lot of it was instinct and intuition based on my own experiences. So when I realized that leaving the next generation better off through mentoring the kids, preparing them for inheritance, a couple of years after that, I knew that we had to have conversations in the family. That was apparent. And a couple of years later, Nancy Ross, who is probably the prime mover behind collaborative divorce, keeping families out of court when they have a life shift in the family, helping them talk to each other, resolve the conflicts, find answers that serve them. She reached out to me and said, we want to bring this collaborative work to Trust and Estates, and we'd like you to be part of the initial committee that designs this. And so we worked really diligently on the conflict side of things, but it was apparent to me that what was missing was the positive side of it, the forward-looking part of it, the aspirational part of it. Fixing conflict is fine, but what if we can actually prevent it and have a situation where families don't allow the cracks to start to appear in their relationships? And so I kind of knew that I wanted a positive aspect, and I had done tracker school, and I had appreciated the amazing transformative nature of being with nature and the spiritual side of it. And I was looking for something to deepen the ties between people in a proactive way. And that's when I went to the workshop with John, and he kept talking about connection. It took me a while, but he talked about how in other countries and cultures, families and people in general celebrate more and have more interaction, like multiple times that the Bushmen would greet each other during the day, not just in the morning, but, coming back from lunch and things. And I think he even outright said connection is my primary interest behind all of this. And yeah, instantly I said, Family Nature Retreats, a place to go and find some quiet, find some time to reflect, get out of the normal day-to-day thought patterns and ruts that we're all in, and to be inspired and refreshed by life and how we could learn from it. Like, certainly listening could be improved through things like bird language exercises, to have a simple example, or making a fire together. Just lots of opportunities to be inspired and celebrate life together. And again, it was my intuition that told me this would be just an amazing marriage of ideas.
Yeah, Peter, I'm so curious about that picture of Family Nature Retreats, and you're describing getting out of the norm and then I'm assuming going into nature. Could you share with us a little bit about what you actually do with families in nature in these retreats and how you see it working for people?
Well, I see it on a continuum from simple to more complex and more time spent on it. We've seen really dramatic transformations in family relationships just in our 2-hour outings into nature. And I'm thinking about the uncle and nephew and the little snake at Hidden Villa and how miraculous that was. It's just amazing. Miracles happen so fast. And it was a chance for them to bond, and all we did really was set the container up. What I originally saw at family nature retreats looking like would be maybe 3 days together with activities sprinkled throughout the 3 days that would be nature oriented, such as maybe a little bit of tracking practice, maybe a little bit of bird language, maybe making fire, sit spot, things like that would complement the actual activities that we wanted to do together as a family. So some individual activities, just connecting with nature purely, some shared activities. I love John's book, The Coyote's Guide to Nature Connection. That's an awesome thing for suggestions for families. And then sitting down and talking about family values, or talking about family governance, or talking about how do we decide what to do with that family vacation home. Do we pass it on to one heir? Do the heirs share it? Is it something that sits outside of the family domain? So I saw us working on exploring family values in that context, maybe starting with philanthropy, but the actual work that needs to be done for each client family is different. Or maybe we could have multiple families and come together for sort of common discussions, but when it comes to details, separating again. So it's really flexible. It's a tailored kind of approach.
Peter, can you tell the story, the uncle and the snake story? Can you tell it in a way that keeps it anonymous? Because that sounded really interesting.
Well, I didn't know what was happening with the particular family during the day, but about a week afterwards, we got a video from the uncle that is just so incredibly touching. And he asked me not to share it with the public, unfortunately, because it's so moving. But he had tears come streaming down his face as he's talking about how much it meant to be able to take his nephew to this event. And he admitted it was just simple. We just went out into nature and played, and we were kind and inclusive. His nephew, who was 15, had just been kicked out of school the day before. So there was a lot of, I guess, conflict or rancor or worries in the family, a lot of anxiety, and the kid probably felt like a third shoe or something. He probably felt very misunderstood and frustrated and separated, isolated from other people in the family. But the night before, this young man had prayed that he would find a snake the next day. And lo and behold, first time they went out into the field, he turned over a rock, and here's this little snake there. And you never saw a cuter snake. If this thing had fur, it wouldn't have been any cuter than it was. Little black thing, like maybe the size of a pencil. And it just sat in this boy's hand, not struggling, not trying to get away, just happy. And the two of them just had a bond that you could sense. And something about all of that, and the uncle said, that was so important for him and for us. And he said that he had never felt that much gratitude in his entire life, the uncle. So how does that happen? Magic, right?
Yeah, just the thing that you're speaking to is nature's ability to really provide us with enoughness. the feeling of like this moment and this experience is enough and it's truly satisfying. And it occurs to me that having that as a foundation is such a great way to lead into a conversation about money, which can so often be about scarcity, right? And so this idea of connection and enoughness and being with the moment and just how beautiful that is. I'm really starting to just see how these things really relate to each other. So I guess it's more of a reflection than a question, but I just wanted to share that.
I would add on to that just the universality of nature, that it is a common context that is non-divisive. We can sit and watch the sunset and no one says a word, but we're all sharing in that beauty and awe and being nourished by it. And, it's creating that sense of safety and openness, relaxation. There's no need to have more, right? Like you're saying, Aiden, that enoughness. Nature is more than enough. It's like so abundant and generous, right? So I'm seeing that thread of common context being, a place where people can come together that's unifying and pure. It doesn't have to do with personalities or ego or finances. And to find each other in that place is such a natural and peaceful experience of each other. And I feel like so many of us are lacking those kinds of experiences in general, really, but with other people and maybe especially with family. But to bring families that have had conflict into those places of shared awe, shared beauty, fun. What was it you said earlier about people that play together, stay together?
Well, I think that there's a lot of talk since the pandemic about mental health and the importance of nature and taking walks and seeing beautiful places. I remember a lot of funny little videos with, I'm taking a stupid walk for my stupid mental health, but, tongue in cheek, because then they pan around and you see this gorgeous lake or mountain or sunset, and we all resonate with it. But it's important when we're building relationships to be in a calm place. We actually heal faster physically. We learn faster if we can just slow our brain waves down, if you will, if you want to look at it that way, or become relaxed and open, or as Dan Siegel, the psychiatrist from UCLA, says, the plane of possibility. There's infinite possibilities when we're in that calm, open space. So that takes a feeling of safety. It takes a feeling of calmness around us, I think. Environment's so important. And in that space, then we can hear more, see more, and have the chance to interact in a space that is not that familiar to either one of us. Each nature experience is a little bit different. So we're put on the same level, if you will, and we have the chance to explore and learn and see things together and experience awe and get the silent mind gift upon which so much can be built. I mean, it's just, there's a million reasons for this. And that's part of the reason I'm excited to get the word out. Not just traditional estate planning is not anywhere near enough, but secondly, to really take care of yourself, to be fruitful, to be abundant, we need to have those kinds of refreshing experiences in our connection with life. And John always has these little pithy statements. One of them was, nature is always communicating with us and it's always ready to heal. I was pretty far into the work when I heard him say that, and I still had to wrestle with it, and I'm still wrestling with it. But it's really true. It's always communicating with us, and it's always ready to heal. The more time you spend with it, the more you realize, I'm not sure how this is happening, but I know damn well it's happening because I'm experiencing it.
I like to think back to working with families in the bird sit context that Peter was referencing earlier. Because when we do bird sits, we're basically all going out to a different part of the land. And let's picture a 20-acre mixed woodland meadow, some open fields. And, you break people into small groups. And everyone goes out and adopts an area so that when we all are sitting at the same time, there's somebody looking somewhere around that whole 20 acres, right? So when a hawk flies through, someone's going to see it. If the wren gives an alarm ahead of the hawk coming, someone's going to hear it. They may not know it's a wren. But when they come back and compare notes, they're like, wow, I heard this little brown bird with its tail flipped up over its back, and it was making this really loud, sounded really tense kind of sound, and it was facing over towards my right, which I think is east. Oh yeah, to the east. And somebody's on the other side over there on the east, and they happen to see the meadow. And at that exact time, a hawk flew, So this is how we help people kind of catch on to the fact that all the birds and animals are actually communicating with each other. And I remember this one very poignant example. And this is just one example of many of what happens in families. There was this uncle. This uncle had a very different relationship with his niece than the uncle you were just talking about with the ringneck steak. Okay. He was always dominating every conversation in the family. He was always telling people what was right and what was wrong, and like shutting people down essentially. Right. And so this teenage girl just felt she couldn't speak in front of her uncle because he never gave her the space ever in her life. And there was a squirrel that during a bird sit went up the tree near the uncle and was wagging its tail, hanging upside down and making a funny noise. And he noticed that, and he just wanted to talk about it. He was used to dominating conversations, but we have this basic cultural tool that comes from Brian Knittel, facilitation as a cultural element. When we're in small groups, make sure everyone has equal time to share, which means that the uncle doesn't get to dominate and the teenage girl is being requested to share. So he's talking all about this hawk, and he actually names the moment when, the time of when that squirrel was doing that display, ran up the tree and was wagging its tail, making a certain noise. And the niece said, "What time did you say that was?" And she said, "I know exactly why that happened." And the uncle, like you can see, she was like, "I can be right this time and you have to hear me." Right. But in that moment, there was such a powerful healing because she was literally in the meadow, right on the edge of the meadow, and she saw the red-tailed hawk coming. And, our staff was watching the whole thing go down. But what ended up happening was that conversation led to the uncle realizing that he only had part of the picture and that his niece had an equally important part of the picture. And that this style of communication using, these connection tools that, we use in family nature retreats, like the 10 stones, which we use in Living Connection First as well, these things work wonders in the context of nature. Because that family, there was a healing between the uncle and the niece, and it makes me get a little emotional even just to think about it and how simple that was, right? That was just, as Sarah was saying, the common context of nature, sharing time in the common context of nature, but also having the connection tools of, the people connection tools, the self-connection tools that Peter mentioned, going and finding your way to that silence and to that awe and to using your senses and appreciation. And then going out on the land in small groups, doing activities with families, coming back and talking about the things that the families have to talk about for their family legacy. Interspersing, right? Taking the tension away, letting nature communicate and heal. Yeah, we've just seen it work wonders. And it's sometimes you scratch your head and you say, why is this working? Right? It's just so simple, but it works.
I'm reflecting on some work that I'm doing with Nancy right now. We worked with a family last fall, and we're working with a family now that there's a lot of wealth in each of these families. And they'd both gotten to the point where people were not talking to each other, which was causing major problems. And there's people triangulating, trying to control, things, and other people running away, and some people hiding in their drug of choice. People are really afraid to get together even. And these little fractures or experiences are interpreted. People make up stories And then for decades, they're living that story, looking for proof of it, more evidence that I'm right and they're wrong, and, they're out to get me. And it's amazing if you can get them into the room together and talking about their own experience and owning it and talking about how they think other people in the family are perceiving them with some coaching and some advanced preparation and interviews, how quickly families can turn from anxiety to a feeling of being close, the affinity feeling, tears of gratitude, hugs in the room. I mean, decades of frustration turned into sort of a love fest in short order. But what strikes me about these families, these are successful families. So often there was a father who was overbearing and had all the answers and didn't let other people speak up. These people want to go in and they want to get right to the heart of the matter. Well, what about that fact that you got more in the inheritance than I did? Well, I'm sorry, but that's not the place to start. Again, the money is the least important part of it. It's about the relationships. So we take them through that. We talk to them individually and then as a group about their hopes for the family, about their challenges, about their concerns, about how they see things. And then they get to listen to each other and not provide feedback or judgment. But I'm just amazed that so many people are so left-brained that they want to go right to the problem, which of course is just going to reinforce the walls that they've built because they've got them, they got their defenses up and everything ready to go. And to turn it around and to say, or not even say it, that they experience connection and healed relationships and the ability to relax in the midst or in the presence of others in the family, that's really where the change happens. And as you pointed out, our culture simply isn't good at connection. So what does that mean? Is that just bad? It's pretty brutal for sure, but it means that if we start to pay attention to that side of our lives a little more, we can have big shifts very quickly. And so we really don't have role models. We have a lot of role models that teach us how to fight and how to attack. And that's a big problem right now. And loneliness is a problem. Yeah, we don't really have the culture. So we're bringing attention to the need for connection. And with the tools and practices in nature, it becomes a really powerful playground or gym for the mind and for the spirit and for the relationships. And so I'm just extremely grateful and remember vividly so many little moments where I knew the bird that hopped in front of me was part of what was going on right then. Everything was one. And it just over and over again for us, but bringing this gift to people, which is right there at their doorstep. And that's why I called my book, The Little Book of Family Treasure. I have this picture of a treasure buried right underneath the living room floor of a family's house, and they don't know it's there. And they're never going to discover it unless they begin to look for it or begin to have some indication that it's there. So that's why this work is just so exciting and rewarding.
Yeah, Peter, I really appreciate the shift in value that you're presenting, right? Valuing the relationships over the finances, and what is being inherited and being passed forward is really about that richness of love. Mic drop.
Yeah, it's the old word. Everybody runs for the hills. I'm kidding. But it is. It's about love. Exactly.
What is this book, The Little Book of Family Treasures? What is the arc of this book, Peter?
My intention was to bring together all of the different perspectives that I've had the privilege of seeing over the last 40-some years since my mother passed away, 45 years. I've seen it from a personal perspective. I've seen it from the loss. I've seen it from the conflict. I eventually recognized that it was absolutely avoidable, and I want people to know that. So I share my personal stories, and I share some of what I've learned out of financial planning, which is that people don't really learn much unless they get to practice it and unless they are calm enough to be able to face it. So this is a no shame zone when we have clients come in. I think we all have some shame around money, like as if it was our fault, which maybe it isn't. Then the work that I've done with Nancy Ross and mediation and collaborative practice and bringing different skill sets of professionals together. So in collaborative practice, we normally have a team that's neutral, and that means they're not taking sides, but they're just assisting the family in the areas of their expertise. And those areas include the legal aspects of estate planning and legacy, the communication and mental health aspects, and the financial aspects. And we can, bring in child specialists and all of that. But I want to share with people that conflict is not the end of the road. It doesn't have to stop people from moving forward. In fact, you'll find conflict right where the treasure's buried. That's why it's there. That's like an oasis in reverse, I guess. It looks threatening, but it actually is covering up something good. And then I want to talk to them about what I've learned with Purposeful Planning Institute, which is some elders and amazing people that really care about people's well-being and approach the legacy from the human side, if you will. So I wanted to bring all the learnings, all the professional insights, all the experience I've had with families and my personal experience, and talk about what happens when connection breaks and how often that is. You need to be aware of this, and that there are certain key principles. Like, people are naturally built for connection, so we don't have to fix anything. We just have to take down the barriers to them experiencing their own gifts and seeing them in action and seeing what they can do. And how do we build that container for all of that to happen? We build it with safety and trust, inclusion, transparency. I mean, already I'm there. I don't know about you guys, but concerts are fine. But if I feel safe and I'm included and people are being vulnerable around me and we're feeling the vibe, that's as good as it gets. My experience with men's work too, overcoming fears of that half of the population to totally being in love with them, how quickly we can shift things and change. And then some reflection on the different roles we take on and that we can shift those. We don't have to be stuck in them. And the mentoring of kids, that's a whole subject by itself. And not just around money, but around themselves and feeling confident and capable. And then the goal of well-being and regenerative family dynamics. And I'm going to produce a workbook to go with this, with evaluation surveys and exercises to help people move past these steps and these stages.
Sounds like a fun book. Everybody should have it buried under their living room rug. No, they should put it on the shelf in the living room.
You found this. Look around for the diamonds. Well, that's true. The people that are going to read it are probably the people who are already, strong in these areas and realize there's potential. But that's what happens in families too. There's usually one person who sees or desires a change of some sort and sees it as maybe possible and fights for it and invites the family into it. And the other family members are like, what? I don't want to talk to Joe again. And oh my gosh, we need to fix this, and nobody listens to me. So there's a lot of confusion, but it falls together when it's led professionally. So for me, it was a very exciting experience to put the book together. I was helping other professionals and friends and clients put together books of their own, and using the tools that are out today, it's super easy. And I said, I need to do this, because if there's anything I really want, I want this message to get out. I want people to see what they're missing. And I want them to see that there are some paths to get to where they want to go. It's not hopeless. This big question we get when we work with families is, is there any hope for our family? And as long as they say they see some value in family, I think there's always hope there.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's your legacy. I think, Peter, part of your legacy is to leave this book. So thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I couldn't ask for a better family to be part of in spirit. And hopefully somebody's touched here, touched, moved, and inspired.
Yeah, those words of hope, I believe as well. And I think that nature is the place that can bring out the magic, that place of beyond ourselves, trying to figure it out. How do I get along with this other person? Stop trying to do it on our own and go into nature and see what happens, kind of hand it over to that magic that is possible there. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. And if you're interested in getting Peter's book or connecting with him or finding out more about family retreats, we're going to have all of that information in the show notes, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to Tracking Connections. If you enjoy this podcast, it would mean a lot to us if you would take a minute to follow or subscribe. Following the podcast helps us, and it helps you because you'll never miss an episode. We'd also love for you to give us a 5-star rating and review and share an episode with a friend. To learn more about our current offerings, visit livingconnectionfirst.net. We'll see you next time.